Harlem, New York City. In June 1963, Bumpy Johnson was 56 years old, newly released from federal prison after serving 11 years in Alcatraz. He returned to a neighborhood that had moved on without him, a place that no longer waited for his name to be spoken before business was done. Harlem at that time was crowded, loud, and divided. It was known for its nightlife, its numbers banks, and its quiet understandings between criminals and power. Money moved fast. Loyalty did not. Control of the streets depended on deals made behind closed doors, and protection paid for in cash. Those who failed to pay or failed to choose the right side did not last long. When Bumpy Johnson went to prison in 1952, Harlem did not stop. His territory was divided, his operations absorbed, and his absence treated as permanent. The environment rewarded men who adapted quickly and punished those who held on to old loyalties. Survival meant making new alliances, even if it meant betraying the past. By 1963, Italian organized crime had expanded its influence in Harlem, working through local operators who paid tribute. Protection replaced independence. Order came not from respect, but from fear and outside approval. The streets answered to new names. Bumpy Johnson returned to this changed world quietly. He did not make announcements. He did not gather crowds. He observed. He listened. He learned who had benefited from his absence and who had remained loyal. The city he had once ruled no longer belonged to him, but it had been built on his foundation. At that moment, Bumpy Johnson stood as a reminder of an older order. He was one of the last independent black crime bosses in Harlem, a man whose power had once come from personal authority rather than permission. The environment now rewarded betrayal and punished patience. Many believed his time had passed. They were wrong. By June 1963, Bumpy Johnson had already established himself as a central figure in Harlem's criminal history. Long before his imprisonment, he was known as the man who unified policy banks, negotiated directly with Italian mob leaders, and enforced order without constant bloodshed. He was a former numbers boss who had survived gang wars, rival enforcers, and federal prosecution. He had faced Dutch Schultz's organization, endured repeated arrests, and spent more than a decade in one of the harshest prisons in the country. These experiences shaped him. He spoke little. He moved slowly. His calm unsettled people more than anger ever could. Those around him noticed the way he carried himself. He did not rush. He did not explain himself. When he entered a room, he chose his seat carefully, always facing the door. Men who had never seen him before could sense the weight he carried. Men who had known him before prison understood what his presence meant. Among Harlem's old-timers, Bumpy Johnson represented continuity. He was the man who had protected local operators from being completely absorbed by outside forces. He had once stood as proof that Harlem could be run from within, without surrendering everything to Italian control. But the system had changed while he was gone. Marcus "Smooth" Henderson, once Bumpy's protégé, had taken over much of his territory. Smooth had worked with the Genovese crime family, paid tribute, and gained protection. He dressed well, lived well, and held court in public. He was the face of the new order. To many younger hustlers, Smooth represented success. To Bumpy Johnson, he represented betrayal. Bumpy had trained Smooth personally. He taught him the numbers business, introduced him to key contacts, and trusted him to hold things together during his prison sentence. For a time, Smooth did exactly that. Then the money stopped. The letters stopped. The organization was handed over piece by piece. Among those who remembered the old days, Bumpy Johnson still symbolized authority rooted in respect rather than convenience. In a system now dominated by Italian influence and shifting loyalties, he stood as something dangerous, a man who remembered every debt and every name. He did not demand loyalty with speeches. He did not need to threaten. His history did that for him. And as word spread that Bumpy Johnson was back in Harlem, people began to understand that the past was no longer buried. It was waiting. But not everyone respected Bumpy Johnson's return. One figure in particular stood in quiet opposition. His name was Marcus "Smooth" Henderson. To many in Harlem, Smooth was not just a man, but a force that represented the new order. He controlled territory, money, and protection. He did it openly, without fear. Marcus Henderson was younger, wealthy, and confident. He dressed in expensive suits, drove luxury cars, and lived high above the streets he controlled. He was known for running numbers banks across Harlem and for keeping business steady while others struggled. He believed he had earned his position. Smooth had also learned how to survive without Bumpy Johnson. During Bumpy's years in prison, Smooth stepped into the vacuum left behind. He worked with Italian crime families, paid tribute, and received protection. In exchange, he was allowed to operate freely. The streets answered to him. What made Smooth dangerous was not violence, but certainty. He believed the past no longer mattered. He believed that power belonged to those who adapted, not those who waited. To him, Bumpy Johnson was history, a name from another time. Smooth had helped outsiders move into Harlem. He had given up information. He had redirected money that once belonged to another man's family. He did these things carefully, slowly, and without immediate punishment. Each year that passed confirmed his belief that he had made the right choice. By 1963, Marcus Henderson believed he was untouchable. Marcus Henderson continued his behavior by exploiting a system built on silence and convenience. The criminal structure in Harlem had shifted while Bumpy Johnson was gone. Italian organized crime offered protection in exchange for control. Local operators who cooperated were left alone. Those who resisted were removed. The system rewarded compliance, not loyalty. Authority tolerated this arrangement because it kept order. Police raids decreased. Violence was limited. Money flowed upward in predictable ways. As long as rules were followed and payments were made, no one asked questions. Stability mattered more than fairness. Smooth understood this better than most. He paid on time. He kept his operations clean. He avoided unnecessary conflict. To the system, he was useful. To the streets, he was successful. There was no reason, from the outside, to challenge him. Each deal that went unpunished strengthened his confidence. Each year without consequence erased the memory of who had built the foundation he stood on. The longer Bumpy Johnson stayed in prison, the safer Smooth felt. By the time Bumpy returned, Smooth had ruled Harlem for 11 years. He had never faced direct opposition. He had never been publicly challenged. The system had taught him that survival meant choosing power over loyalty, and he believed that lesson was final. Marcus Henderson did not prepare for consequences. He believed the system would protect him. He believed the past could not reach him. He was wrong. The first incident happened during a routine moment, one that most people would have missed. Every Friday night, Marcus Henderson ate dinner at Small's Paradise. He always sat at table 7, in the back corner. It was his place. Everyone knew it. The table was not reserved by name, but no one else dared to take it. It was understood who it belonged to. 3 days after Bumpy Johnson returned to Harlem, Smooth kept his routine. He arrived on time. He laughed loudly. He held court. What he did not do was acknowledge Bumpy's return. There was no message sent. No visit made. No word of respect or apology. In Harlem, silence could be louder than words. Smooth's decision not to reach out was not an accident. It was a signal. Bumpy Johnson noticed. He heard where Smooth was eating. He heard who sat with him. He heard how Smooth spoke about the future, as if the past no longer existed. Still, Bumpy said nothing. He did not send warnings. He did not challenge Smooth in public. To those watching, this looked like hesitation. Some believed Bumpy had changed. 11 years in prison had aged him. They said the streets belonged to younger men now. They said the world had moved on. Silence, to them, meant surrender. But Bumpy Johnson was watching. Those close to Bumpy Johnson expected a different response. They had known him before prison. They remembered how quickly he acted when challenged. They believed that disrespect would be answered immediately, the way it always had been. When nothing happened, they were confused. Some worried. Some whispered that time had weakened him. They mistook his quiet for uncertainty. In Harlem, hesitation was often fatal. But Bumpy's restraint was deliberate. He did not react because he was choosing the moment. He was measuring the damage. He was learning who stood where. Every hour of silence allowed people to reveal their loyalties without being asked. Those who understood the environment saw something else. They knew that patience was not fear. It was control. In a world built on impulse, waiting was power. Bumpy Johnson had learned that lesson long before prison. He had survived by knowing when not to move. Now, he was doing the same. The streets would soon understand the difference between weakness and warning. They just did not know it yet. The next incident occurred 1 week later, early in the morning, at a Numbers bank on 125th Street. The location had once operated under Bumpy Johnson's authority. It was part of the system he built years earlier, long before prison. Now the same doors opened to collect money for Marcus Henderson. Smooth ordered higher collections. Long-time collectors were replaced with younger men loyal only to him. The change was intentional. It erased the past and made the message clear. This business no longer answered to Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy Johnson was told about it that same day. He listened. He said nothing. To some, this silence was confusing. A man had taken something that once belonged to him, openly and without fear. Still, Bumpy did not interfere. He did not reclaim the bank. He did not send word. The second incident happened days later, in the early evening, at a bar near Mount Morris Park. The bar was known as neutral ground. Men from different crews drank there without trouble. That night, Smooth's people spoke loudly about territory. They joked about how Harlem had changed. They spoke as if no one from the old days remained. Bumpy Johnson's name came up. It was dismissed. Again, Bumpy remained restrained. The third incident followed soon after, this time involving police protection. Smooth's operations continued without raids. His clubs stayed open. His banks ran uninterrupted. Everyone understood what that meant. Payments were being made. Agreements were being honored. Bumpy Johnson noticed who was protected and who was not. He noticed who felt safe enough to affected them. Still, he did nothing. The fourth incident took place at Small's Paradise. Smooth arrived earlier than usual. He brought more men with him. He made sure they stood where everyone could see them. He laughed loudly and spoke openly, acting as if the room belonged to him alone. Bumpy Johnson did not challenge him. Weeks passed like this. Each small act added weight. Each incident strengthened Marcus Henderson's belief that nothing would happen. The longer Bumpy stayed quiet, the more Smooth trusted the system that protected him. Confidence grew. Confidence became arrogance. In places like Harlem, unchecked confidence is dangerous. It removes caution. It convinces men that history no longer applies to them. It turns patience into something that looks permanent. Marcus Henderson had reached that point. Everything changed when the matter of Bumpy Johnson's wife became clear. While Bumpy was serving his sentence, he believed his organization was being held together. For the first 2 years, money was sent as promised. Then it stopped. Letters stopped. Contact ended. Bumpy learned the truth after his release. Marcus Henderson had kept the money. Not temporarily. Not by mistake. He had kept it permanently. That money was meant to support Bumpy's wife during 11 years of imprisonment. It was not business profit. It was obligation. In the world Bumpy Johnson came from, this line was clear. Crossing it changed everything. There was no authority response. No system corrected the wrongdoing. The structure in place rewarded Smooth for keeping things quiet and profitable. As long as tribute was paid and violence was limited, no one intervened. That silence sealed the outcome. From that moment on, the result was unavoidable. Bumpy Johnson did not need advice. He did not need approval. The decision had already been made. What followed would not be rushed. It would not be chaotic. It would be seen and understood by everyone who mattered. The system had failed to correct the betrayal. So the streets would. That evening, Bumpy Johnson spoke quietly to the men who had remained loyal. He did not raise his voice. He did not make threats. He did not explain himself in detail. He simply asked questions and gave instructions. His tone was calm, almost casual, but the meaning was clear to those who knew him. He asked where Marcus Henderson ate. He asked when he arrived. He asked who sat with him. Then he said what would happen next. Bumpy told them he would speak to Smooth face to face. Not in an office. Not through messages. Not through intermediaries. He said the meeting would be public, and it would happen soon. No one argued. No one asked for clarification. They understood that this was not a warning meant to change behavior. It was a statement of fact. Once Bumpy Johnson decided something, there was no reversal. Those who heard him knew the difference between anger and certainty. This was not emotion. It was resolution. They understood that whatever came next would not be loud or drawn out. It would be direct. It would be final. And it would be seen. Bumpy Johnson did not speak again about it. The setting of the final incident was ordinary. Small's paradise opened as it always did. Tables filled. Music played. People arrived after work, looking for food, drink, and comfort. It was a Friday night in Harlem, and nothing seemed unusual. Marcus Henderson followed his routine. He arrived on time. He dressed well. He sat at table 7. His men stood nearby. To him, it was just another night where things continued as they always had. Bumpy Johnson also followed routine. He walked in without announcement. He wore a simple suit. He did not rush. He took a seat near the back, facing the door. To most people, he looked like an older man having dinner. The contrast mattered. Life continued around them. Plates were served. Conversations flowed. Music warmed the room. No one knew exactly what would happen, but many sensed that something was different. The ordinary nature of the setting made the moment heavier. There were no drawn weapons. No raised voices. No signs of conflict. That was why what followed would never be forgotten. History was about to interrupt routine. Marcus Henderson escalated publicly. When he saw Bumpy Johnson sitting nearby, he did not lower his voice. He did not show caution. Instead, he continued to act as if nothing had changed. He laughed. He spoke to his men. He ignored the presence of the man who had once ruled Harlem. Then he crossed into open disrespect. Smooth refused to acknowledge Bumpy. He acted as if the table beside him did not matter. In a room full of people who understood the history, that silence was no longer subtle. It was deliberate. There was no ambiguity left. Everyone watching understood what this meant. Smooth was not backing down. He was declaring that the past no longer held power. He believed the room, the system, and his protection would shield him. That was the moment Bumpy Johnson stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not insult or threaten. He simply spoke Smooth's name and told him to sit. The command was calm, but it carried weight. It stopped the room. The choice was no longer private. It was public. And it was final. According to witnesses, everything happened in seconds. The restaurant went still. Music stopped. People froze where they sat. Men reached for weapons, but no one fired. The movement was controlled, measured, and deliberate. Bumpy Johnson did not rush. His actions were precise. He directed Smooth's men to leave. Weapons appeared, but no shots were fired. The balance of power shifted instantly. Smooth was made to sit. What followed was fast and controlled. There was no struggle. No chaos. Bumpy Johnson used a blade, not to kill, but to mark. A single movement. A thin line cut across Smooth's face. The message was clear. Before police could arrive, before anyone could interfere, the outcome was decided. Smooth was given his punishment and his warning. He was ordered to leave Harlem within 24 hours. The violence was brief, but the meaning was permanent. Those who witnessed it understood immediately. This was not a fight. It was judgment. It was not rage. It was enforcement. By the time Bumpy Johnson walked out, history had already changed. Bumpy Johnson stopped immediately after the action was done. There was no second strike. No extra movement. The moment ended exactly when he decided it would end. He stepped back from Marcus Henderson and allowed the room to breathe again. The danger passed as quickly as it had arrived. People expected chaos. It did not come. Bumpy did not shout. He did not argue. He did not attempt to escape the room. His posture remained calm, almost formal, as if the matter had been settled in a private office instead of a crowded restaurant. Those closest to him watched carefully. They understood this part mattered just as much as what had already happened. Violence without control creates fear. Violence with restraint creates authority. When authority finally stepped in, Bumpy Johnson did not resist. He did not struggle. He did not insult anyone. He allowed himself to be guided away, not as a defeated man, but as someone who had completed his task. His face showed no regret, no anger, no urgency. Before he was removed, he spoke one final line. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was not meant for one person. This is how order is restored. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Everyone in the room understood what he meant. This was not about revenge. It was not about ego. It was about balance. Bumpy Johnson left knowing the message had already spread. Nothing more needed to be said. Marcus Henderson survived the night. But survival did not mean escape. The mark on his face was permanent. It healed slowly, but it never disappeared. Wherever he went afterward, people noticed it. No explanation was needed. The scar told the story before he ever spoke. By the next morning, Marcus Henderson left Harlem. He packed what he could carry. He did not argue the deadline. He did not ask for protection. He understood that staying would not end the same way twice. He boarded a bus and disappeared from the streets he once controlled. He never returned. Across Harlem, the reaction was immediate. Men who had grown comfortable during Bumpy Johnson's absence began to adjust their behavior. Payments that had stopped were corrected. Promises that had been ignored were suddenly honored. Conversations changed tone. No one needed reminders. The story spread faster than any announcement could have. It passed through barbershops, backrooms, street corners, and kitchens. Every version carried the same meaning. Bumpy Johnson was back. The Genovese crime family took notice as well. They did not send threats. They did not challenge him openly. Instead, they sent a representative to talk. The meeting was brief. Terms were stated. Lines were drawn. No argument followed. Within weeks, outside influence pulled back from Harlem. It was not worth the cost. Fighting Bumpy Johnson required more than money or numbers. It required certainty, and that was something no one wanted to test. The transformation did not come through widespread violence. It came through memory. People remembered who had built the system before prison. They remembered how order had once been kept. They remembered that respect was not something taken quietly while someone was gone. Bumpy Johnson did not celebrate his return. He did not give speeches. He did not expand recklessly. He did not chase attention. He simply resumed his place. The night at Small's Paradise became a reference point. Years later, people still spoke about it in low voices. They talked about how quickly it happened. How calm it was. How final it felt. It became a lesson. Patience is often mistaken for weakness. Silence is often mistaken for surrender. But in some men, patience is preparation, and silence is warning. Marcus Henderson learned that lesson too late. Harlem learned it in time. When the events were later reviewed, a clear pattern emerged. Nothing that happened came without warning. The final moment did not appear suddenly or without cause. It was the result of a long sequence of actions that had been building for weeks. First came escalation. Marcus Henderson had taken control during Bumpy Johnson's absence. He expanded operations that were not his to claim. He kept money that did not belong to him. He spoke and acted as if the past no longer mattered. Each step increased tension, even when it was ignored in public. Then came the warnings. They were not shouted. They were not written. They were understood. Bumpy Johnson's return alone was a signal. His silence was another. His choice not to challenge Smooth right away gave every opportunity for correction. None were taken. Next came system failure. The structure in place rewarded cooperation with outside power and punished loyalty. As long as money flowed and violence stayed low, authority looked the other way. The system did not correct betrayal. It protected convenience. Because of that failure, responsibility shifted. The final conclusion was unavoidable. When authority fails to enforce its own rules, order finds another path. In this case, it came through a single, public act meant to restore balance rather than destroy it. Those who studied the incident later agreed on one point. The outcome was not random. It was not emotional. It followed a clear line from cause to result. Escalation led to response. Silence led to warning. Failure led to consequence. By the time the final moment arrived, it was no longer a question of if something would happen. Long after the incident, the story continued to circulate. It was not told because of blood or noise. It was not repeated for excitement. It lasted because it carried meaning. People spoke about it quietly, often without names, because everyone already knew who it was about. In Harlem, the night at Small's Paradise became a reference point. Older men used it as a lesson. Younger men heard it as a warning. It explained how power really worked when the system failed to protect what it claimed to value. The story showed that patience can be mistaken for weakness, but only by those who do not understand time. Bumpy Johnson waited because he was watching. He listened because he was measuring. When he acted once. That was the part people remembered. No army was used. No war followed. One moment, handled with control, was enough to reset an entire environment. It reminded everyone that respect is not given by position or money, but by history and consequence. In places like this, power does not belong to the loudest man. It belongs to the one who understands when to remain silent and when to make himself understood. When authority fails, order always returns, through someone willing to enforce it.